Hello everyone. Simon Jacobson is my name. I welcome you all. I first begin with a congratulations to our dear friend Jeff and Rachel upon your engagement to be married. Every time I hear a couple get engaged, especially in New York, I'm ecstatic because there's so many different fragments that need to be connected. Enough said. It's that every time there is a little connection made, it's a good news. And hopefully it ripples through the entire city, state, country, and world. And everyone here that needs a blessing to find their soulmate should find one as soon as possible. And all in good, with the least amount of aggravation. I just want to dedicate the class for Refuah Shleim before we'll get the full name soon. Our good friend Mark's father. You'll tell me the name, we'll announce it a little later. And I was looking out the window today to see if another storm is coming, because the last 2 weeks, despite my hardest efforts to arrive here, 1 week was Sandy, and the next was last week's, whatever we call it, snowstorm. So I had no problem really coming, but if I came here, no one else was here. Not that it's happened in the past, but I thought it'd be easier to broadcast from the comfort of my own environment, which is what we did. Vel was much more practical than I am, but I have to say that 30 years I've really worked overtime to make sure that I never ever even take off 1 week of this class. And I remember even after 9/11 was a Tuesday morning, right? So you imagine everything was closed down as well. And everybody wondered whether that Wednesday night would have a class. And I made it, and we had not only had a class, it was a packed room. Remember, it was on 89th Street. The only way to get from Brooklyn to Manhattan actually was not through any bridges. I had to go through Queens, through the Midtown Tunnel, which this time was closed. The Midtown Tunnel, because the truth is it took me faster than always because all the streets were empty. Everybody was terrified. I mean, you all remember the 9/11 mood. Bottom line is, however, with the magic of technology, we're able to broadcast, and even Mighty Sandy was not able to stop the internet of Crown Heights, at least. I don't know about other places. Well, obviously our heart goes out to all our friends and people we don't know, to the damage that has been endured, as well as, a good friend, one of the early founders of this class. When I say founder, a person who's brought many people here. It's a home where we spent many hours teaching, learning, and so on in Rockaway. He's basically gone. And my heart goes out to Kenny. But as they say, Jews, we've survived everything. We've survived hurricanes. We've survived worse than hurricanes. They say after a fire, we get wealthy. After any type of disaster, calamity, may God bless everyone with abundance of wealth. That's how it works. So chesed comes love. Gvura is judgment and severity. And that always follows by teferis, which is wealth and prosperity. So that's my blessing to all of us. So that's a good segue to what we'll discuss, which is process. Now, one of the two of the main ingredients, secrets you can even say, secret ingredients to life and success, which sadly is very much compromised and undermined in our modern day and age, is the two words process and let's use emergence. Because of our ability to press buttons and get anything immediately, instantaneously, like they like to say in technology, anything, anywhere, anytime, we have lost sight of the process. Today you can get any fruit, any food, any produce, any time of the year, even if it's out of season. So it has all the blessings and comforts and that it provides, but you lose the sense of process. When you lived on a farm, you planted a seed, and you knew that you had to nurture that seed, and you had to wait for the rains, and you needed to go through and deal with the natural cycles and rhythms of life. There's a certain being in touch with the natural rhythms of the seasons and so on. Same thing when we bear children. So any mother knows carrying a child could be difficult and painful, but there's something about it that's part of the process. And things are not acquired, but they emerge. Anything real in life, look at it And you'll see it always is a process, and secondly, it always requires an emergence. It's not something you can buy off a shelf. But we live in an acquisition-oriented society, and a society that, as I said, we want things instantaneously. Instantaneous acquisitions, we can call it, when in truth, anything like truth, like love, like God, spirituality, life itself, beauty, happiness, are all forces that require a process and an emergence. Think about it, and it may change the way you even seek these things. I'm saying it because the Torah is really all about a process. We read it 52 weeks of the year, like the 52 weeks are a process as the year rolls on. So the Torah, the chapters are also correspond, each week has its corresponding chapter. And beyond the story itself and the chronology of the events, it's really a process of growth. And you see it, if you look at, let's say, the chapters that we're reading now in the book of Genesis. So it begins with the beginning. It's exactly what it's called, in the beginning. Every process has a beginning, right? Bereshis, the beginning. Creation, Genesis, whatever word you use for it, the conception, the beginnings of things. And you see the generations, each of them. First, the forgetting their purpose, corruption, then rebuilding. It's always about being born in innocence, losing that innocence to some extent, things being broken, and then healing. And then the process begins again. And obviously the end process, you don't just want to have a equal sum gain. You want to have a profit. So every so-called descent, every challenge is meant to bring greater strengths. So you have the story in the last weeks we read about the corruption of the world, the flood, Noah saving the world being rebuilt. Then Abraham comes on board and he begins a new process, the process of bringing light into the world, and he builds a family which is dedicated to tzedakah, mishpat, charity and justice, kindness, and he in turn bears child Isaac, who continues that tradition, continues that legacy. And that's where we are now, the story of the chapters of the patriarchs. And they're essentially pioneers. They're beginning with Abraham, pioneers of what it means to be giving. Where we all are born in a world where we can easily be selfish and be consumed with self-interest and all that brings. Or we can learn to become selfless and learn to realize that we're here, we have a calling to serve, a calling to give, a calling to illuminate and warm the world around us, the environment around us, and not just to take and fill ourselves up, but to illuminate, to produce, to bear fruit, which is actually the name of this week's chapter. Ve'elu told us Yitzchak, and these are the fruit. Told us in Hebrew, it can mean children, it can mean offspring, but also means fruit. It's like Rashi says, what are the fruit of righteous people? They are good deeds. Our good deeds are our children, are our offspring. Obviously, literal children as well, but children are also sometimes called, our students are called our children. Anyone that you have taught, even one word, is in a way a fruit of yours. To the point that sometimes it's considered, someone that you taught is considered as if you give birth to them. Spiritual birth, psychological birth, whatever it is that helps us grow. So Ella told us Yitzchak, continuing the process, what Abraham passed on to Isaac. Isaac passes on now to the next generation, the birth of Jacob and Esau, the twin brothers, and their battles. And I've discussed this theme many times. What I'd like to address here is some of this process, especially in context of a treatise, a discourse that I've been teaching every morning actually, and it's on YouTube, called Ayin Beis, a mystical treatise, but a magnum opus, an epic actually, that when you look into it really opens up the secrets of mysticism, but more importantly the secrets of life. Secrets of life and how we can learn about ourselves in a deeper way. Like essentially mapping the human genome. As you know, they're mapping the genes. There's also the spiritual genome. What makes us tick? What makes our psyches, our consciousness, our spirituality tick? And there is a map. There is a blueprint. And when you understand it, it helps tremendously. First of all, to enlighten you who you are. Also then to juxtapose and align where do you stand as opposed to your potential. And in turn, giving you you can plot out then coordinates of a goal. And say, okay, if this is my potential and here's my actual, which is always less than the potential, as you imagine, how do I map out a future plan for my life where I can tap more into my potential and actualize more of it, create focus and all that's necessary, which is really what the Torah is all about. The Torah is a blueprint, a roadmap, if you like. We live in a world where, even if we have very 2020 vision, it's a dark world where we don't know what the next turn will bring. So essentially, it's a dark world in the sense of, spiritually speaking, opportunities. Where is our future, our destiny lie? Where will we find our happiness? Where will we find our love? These things are all in the dark. What the Torah does, think of it like the beaming headlights of a car in a dark road, is it shines the light. It doesn't create anything new. It just illuminates the paths. And each character, each episode, every aspect of the Torah is an unfolding story of your life. And therefore the process of these Abraham and then the children of Abraham, but Elah told us, and these are the children of Isaac, are all part of that process. So the question we'll start with an opening question, and then I'll take it to explain it as the way Ayin Beis explains this whole discussion. Ayin Beis literally is just a short acronym for Ayin Beis in Hebrew is 72. It's referring to the year 5672, which is 100 years ago. Now we're 5772. That year, 5672, which would be the equivalent of 1912, 1913, which is where we are now, 100 years later, in the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, a unprecedented mystic and thinker. He authored and delivered this series of discourses, which literally go for thousands of pages. Well, probably the most comprehensive mystical discourse ever delivered and written and published. You can almost say it's also unfinished because he never concluded it. He passed away in 1920, but he continued writing it almost to the end of his life. And being that it's the centennial, the 100th year, I've been teaching it on a daily basis. It's pretty dense, but I teach it in the text, try to explain it. So you can just check out Ayin Beis. YouTube has an Ayin Beis channel. Maybe at this point we may have more hours of classes there than almost anyone. I haven't checked whether we've broken any records. That's not my goal, but simply the length of the treatises and the discussions just take us there. So hopefully we'll get a call from Google soon saying we're using too much of their bad bandwidth. That would be good news. Because then everyone will ask, what are you using it for? What's this Ayin Beis? So maybe that will be interesting. What's this Ayin Beis cluttering all our bandwidth? We have news to stream. So the opening question on this week's chapter is this: Ve'ela told this. So every word in Hebrew and every word in the Bible is precise. So you look at the first words, as I said, Ve'ela told us. How would you translate? And these are the children of. These are the descendants, the offspring, the pedigree, the fruit. They're all appropriate names for the word told us. And Ve'ela told us, these are the offspring of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Abraham gave birth to Isaac, and then it continues how Isaac was 40 years old. Him and his wife did not have children. They prayed to God, and then Rebecca conceives, and she becomes pregnant with twins. And mind you, it's a difficult pregnancy because these twins are at war with each other. These two children. And God explains to Rebecca they're at war because these are two nations inside of you that are antithetical to each other, which we shall soon discuss as well. They would end up being Jacob and Esau, respectively the ancestors of the Jewish people and the ancestor Esau of the Roman Western Christian world. So that's all their battles that they would go through history, the battles over Jerusalem, the battles that raged through most of the last 2,000 years are all predestined or dictated here in this week's chapter. But the question that's asked is, the word ve'ela told us means, and these are. In Hebrew, when you say ve, you add a vav, the beginning of a word, it means and, which means it's a continuation, it's adding and a continuation, resuming what was discussed earlier. So the Medrash says, whenever you say ve'ela, it means you're adding to what says earlier, and when you don't have a vav, an and, saying these are, that means a new chapter is beginning. So in some way, this chapter is really a continuation of the previous chapter. So when you look at the end of the previous chapter, what does it conclude with? The children of Yishmael. That's the end of last week's chapter. And Yishmael is the second son, besides Isaac, of Abraham, who in turn is the ancestor of the Yishmaelite Arab Muslim world. So right here you have, in these few verses, basically a large part of the world's population today. And as I discussed last week, there's also the Eastern world, the Buddhist world, which is also connected to the journey to the East that the children of Abraham took. So that I discussed. I'm not going to address that. So the question that's asked is, so what is the continuing story? Doesn't it seem like Isaac, these are the children of Isaac, it's a new chapter, a new era is beginning. Why does the Torah suggest that it's a continuation of the previous chapter of the children of Ishmael? What is the ongoing, flowing story here? So to answer all this, and I'll answer that after going through a longer explanation, we'll talk. Let's move more to a more, psychological and philosophical plane here. One of the biggest challenges in life is precisely that, dealing with challenges. That itself is the biggest challenge. Now, who doesn't have challenges? Anybody here? I would submit that you wouldn't be sitting here if you had no challenges. If you were completely self-contained, completely comfortable, you don't need to make any moves. You don't need to go learn anything. You don't need to study anything. You can just stay home and wallow in your comforts. Well, the fact is, however, that all of us have challenges. And sometimes worse than challenges, meaning sometimes difficulties. Often it takes on the shape of very cruel realities. Now, I can't speak for everyone here, but if you're a cross-section, and I include everybody in cyberspace listening, this world is not an easy world. Maybe at times it's very easy, and maybe when we're very young and we're protected and nurtured, it may seem easy as well. Unfortunately, even that is not always a given today. Children don't always necessarily grow up in comfortable homes and healthy homes. It's a tough life. Life is tough. Life is difficult. Which, by the way, that opening line, they say, was the reason that one of the biggest bestsellers in self-help books, the first one of them all, in the modern age, called The Road Less Traveled, some people just read that line and never read anything else. And they said, wow, this is amazing. The opening line of that book is, life is difficult. That resonated with many people. Now, I don't know whether everyone continued reading and how it helped everyone. Some argue that because the best-selling books about self-help continue to dominate the bestseller lists, that means they're not working. Or else, how many books can there be? That's itself a sign that it's not working. But we won't go into that right now. I guess it works somewhat. The bottom line is the search continues. And I'm not here to give you a magic formula and say, here, press these few buttons, and there you go, you'll find your happiness to get rid of difficulties. That's not the Torah way, it's not the Jewish way, it's not realistic. It's like I said earlier, it's about a process, about emergence. But however, what we could learn to do is maybe stop making the same mistakes and creating false expectations of quick panaceas and results. And learn to actually do the right things that will allow the emergence and the process to actually take hold in our lives, where we will be able to find what we're looking for and minimize the pains in the process of discovering that. Which is really, as I said, the long, short road, but it's the guaranteed road. Because then it's empowering. It's not just about a quick fix or some type of instant gratification, something quick you're going to do, and then you'll resolve it. It's really learning to be a fundamentally stronger person. And something that's sustainable. Sustainable not only when you're in the presence of someone that inspires you, but sustainable even when you're on your own and dealing with those challenges, because that's where the real challenge is, when you are in your own lonely space. So the question is, how do we get out of our own trappings? We're subjective. It says, which means someone who's in fetters, someone who's bound up, cannot free themselves. To put it in terms of more, in scientific terms, they say no system can change itself. If you yourself are if you are suffering, you can't always alleviate your own suffering because you're subjective. You may not even know. You may be even feeding it. Someone that's deep in a pit needs to be thrown a rope. So how does one begin the journey out of any situation? I'm very broad here. Everyone has got their situation. If you're here, how do you get here? How do you climb? In a more, let's put it in more theological terms, if you wish, or philosophical terms, you can say, as skeptics and seekers, poets and thinkers, everybody from the beginning of history, philosophers, romantics, anyone, has always wondered, is it really possible to escape the confines of our mortal world? Can we taste eternity? Can we experience transcendence? And in essence, basically all the human creations, all our efforts, all our devices, whether it's music or art or travel or religion or faith or spirituality or love, are really elements of what we're looking to try to find some transcendence, some relief from the monotony, from the patterns, from the habits that we're all, one way or other, stuck in. Now, those habits can take on the shape of just being a plain monotonous habit, but as usual, things don't stay in one place. If you're bored, trust me, you're going to get more in trouble than you are, because you're looking for some relief. You're looking for some release. And therefore, one can argue that's maybe the biggest question of all, that no matter what you do, you're going to hit a glass ceiling, because we are, at the end of the day, mortals. We age, we erode. I don't mean to sound morbid, but and things get weaker in our lives. So how can we really expect, can we really touch heaven? Can we really touch the beyond? Or is it just an illusion? Or we can just have a little taste of it. And whether, as I said, mystical systems from the east to the west have all tried to address this issue. Is it possible for human beings on earth to some way connect to something beyond? So the question is both for people who are in a darker situation, how do you get from darkness to light, from pain to joy? But also a question, how do you get from the finite to the infinite, so to speak? And when we read different poems and we read different thoughts, there are those different writers that resonate with us, that capture the message. It could be through music itself, it could be through lyrics, it can be through poetry. You have the ideas of touching something that is beyond. I mean, William Blake's famous line, which became the name of a band in the late 60s, mid-60s, was that when you cleanse the doors of perception, you're left with reality, which is that everything is infinite. So however you understand that, metaphorically or literally, but clearly it's like saying that we live in a world that is very blind to the bigger picture. And that's pretty obvious today. Today this does not require faith. Today this is common knowledge, whether it's in the world of physics, it's in the world of, whether in the world of science, whether in the world of chemistry or biology, that the most powerful forces of life are behind closed doors, meaning behind the curtain. And we cannot see it, yet we know it's clearly there. Whether it's DNA, whether it's microscopic cells, whether it's microscopic particles, subatomic particles, quantum mechanics. These are the forces that we've discovered that shape reality. They're indeterministic in many ways. They're definitely invisible. And they work by their own rules. But they shape the reality that we are aware of. So if you were to ask yourself, what do we really see and perceive with our five senses from this side of the curtain, is a very small percentage. We don't even know the percentage because we don't know what's on the other side. You can't say what percentage is on this side until you know what's on the other side. But one thing we know, there's much more there than here. We know that the forces there are definitely bottomless almost. As they say, going down the rabbit hole. How far can you go? So we have the tip of the iceberg, the surface level. And this, of course, is addressed extensively in Torah, and especially in the mystical teachings of Torah. Ayin Beis concerns itself very much with this. What's going on the other side? And how does that side look at us as we look at it? We look at it from the bottom up. How does it look at it? And interestingly, it describes it in a three-tiered structure, so to speak. So we look at our structure, there are definitely definitions, and through a process of elimination, you can come to understand things that are beyond our structure. Like many times, we interpolate through direct, we call direct logic, but direct logic leads us to indirect logic, which means through eliminating, you can figure out things that you can't see directly or experience directly, empirically, but you experience it indirectly by realizing that it's not what you are touching. So when someone says to you, let's say your child asks you a simple question, what is love? I can't touch it. I can't feel it. I can't see it. I can't hear it. So you're not going to say it doesn't exist. You'll say, well, think about something you can't touch. Is it real? Because you can't touch it. And you start realizing that by realizing that you can't touch it, that itself allows you to touch it. Not with the same fingers. It means touch it in a different way, with your heart. This is a common experience. If you are trying to listen to the subtle sounds of a violin, but in the background there's jackhammers or the New York natural sounds of the street, you're not going to hear it. Why? Because it's too subtle. You have to shut down the other sounds or lower them, and then you can suddenly hear something emerge. Again, the word emergence. So there's much going on behind the surface. The Zohar and the Kabbalah teaches us that each of us releases a hum. We have a melody within our soul, a song. So why is it we don't hear it? Because the distractions of our lives, and I don't just mean physical sounds, the preoccupations with survival, the needs, what occupies your mind, what consumes you, is so dominant that it doesn't allow you to hear your own soul. So you don't even know what your soul wants or asks for. It's like a little child crying, but there's so much noise going on because the party is so loud, you don't even hear the child crying. So there are many, many forces in life on the outer level that don't allow us to feel or touch what is behind the scenes. Now, for the resident Kabbalists here, or if you're not a resident Kabbalist, I'll give you a primer. There's a concept, there's a term called sphirot. This is a word used in the book of formation, Sefer Yetzirah, one of the earliest, if not the earliest, Kabbalistic work. Some actually attribute it to Abraham. And being that Abraham sent to the east some of the secrets, it's likely that some of those secrets are from the book of formation. So Abraham, in this book, in the book of Sefer Yetzirah, talk about a thing called that there are 10 spheres without substance. I mean, the word spheres is not really a good translation. In Hebrew, it's a Hebrew word sephira. We'll soon explain what that means. But there are 10, let's call them for practical purposes right now, 10 spiritual emanations, 10 spiritual attributes, 10 spiritual instruments. 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11 is what it says there. Esesphere is blima, without substance. And these 10 manifest to the point that they become what we would call 10 faculties. So we have intellectual faculties, we have emotional faculties. These faculties all sum up in the building blocks, in the spiritual, psychic building blocks of the human being, are made up of 10 parts. But these 10 are not limited to 10, it's 10 basics. These 10 are interconnected and interact, so it's 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, and actually multiplies. And when in the different configurations of these 10, essentially are the building blocks, the spiritual building blocks of everything in existence. Literally everything. Every creature, every mineral, vegetable, animal, and human being. And we too are made up of these 10 forces. But in the spiritual realms, they're called 10 spheres. So the question is, what does this word sphere mean? And how does it help us in our lives? As you shall see, sphere is the interface that actually allows us to go from that journey that I described, from the finite to the infinite, from the dark to the light. That wherever you are in your life, these are stepping stones that allow you to travel to a greater place. Now that's, if you think about it, a pretty amazing thing. Wish we all learned this in school. That no matter where you are in life, you have stepping stones to get out of trouble. You have stepping stones to grow. Whatever it is that blocks you. Something's not working in your life. Even if things are working in your life, you have stepping stones to get to a place that's greater than where you are today. And who doesn't want to grow in that sense? In Kabbalistic terminology, these are 10 steps, the 10 spheres. But the key is understanding what does sphere mean. And by understanding the meaning of it, you'll see how it actually can be applied to each one of our lives in a true formula. So the word sphera, some of you may be familiar with sphera in another context. Sphera Omer, where we count the 49 days between Passover and Shavuot, and it's also called sphera. So right there is one meaning in the word sphera means to count. From the word mispar in Hebrew, sphera means to count, a number. Mispar is a number, and l'safer or sphera is the act of counting. A second interpretation in the word sphera is the meaning is sipur. Sipur means a narrative, to tell a story. So a story is called a sipur. L'saper is the act of telling the story, narrating a story. So just like l'saper can be the count and mispar is the number, this is a story and the telling of a story. And the third interpretation given is from the word sapphire, the sapphire stone, which is a translucent stone, which is a stone that is a lustrous stone that shines. That sipur comes from the word, sphera comes from the word saper, which means to shine, brilliant, to illuminate. You can say crystallization, clarity. And in a very detailed, complex, and methodical flow, Ayin Beis, probably in around 35 or 40 chapters, so we're talking about almost like over 100 pages, addresses these three interpretations. And I'll give you a summary, so you don't have to go through all the dense language, but it can't hurt if you do. So what does he say? So he says that the word number is really in broader terms, captures the definition of our existence as we know it. Everything is defined by numbers. And number here means quantity, volume, weight, size. That's how we define space and time. Time and space, which are the parameters of our existence, how do we define time and space? By measurements, by numbers. A day, an hour, a second, 100 days, 100 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years. We describe things by height, by weight, by volume, by size, and so on. Even the most minuscule things in existence, so they're microscopic, but they have a measurement that is minus to the greatest power. I don't know if any of you saw a very interesting website someone sent me, where they take the most minuscule things in existence and the largest one and scale them. Did you ever see that? It's amazing. I have to find the link. If any of you are interested, send me an email, I'll send it to you. You just see the scope of size. The largest things in existence and the smallest things. And the largest is not a whale or an elephant, you can imagine. I'm talking about solar systems and beyond solar systems, and all the way to the most minuscule cell and so on. And it actually scales it, so you see it in proportion with a human being, like where we fit in the whole picture. Yes, we're closer to elephants, you can imagine, than to the largest things. But bottom line is, everything so the word number, sphere, is actually one word captures the essence of material reality. That it has time and space that is measurable. Quantity, we'll call it quantity. Now, it's interesting, this quantity per se, when you count something, someone says, what are you worth? So there's a number, a certain number. But numbers can also become something very superficial. Someone will say, I have 5 children, I have 10 children. So another person who's a stranger will say, oh wow, sounds a nice sized family. Is that the same as a mother and father appreciating their 10 children? Their 10 children are more than 10. They're the number 10. But their qualitative level is far more than 10. 10 is just a physical number. So we really have an option when we look at the material quantity of the world. We can value quantity, even worship quantity, and completely forget the quality of it. I don't know if it's appropriate to quote Oscar Wilde in the context of I Am Bays, but what does he say? He said, some people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And then, of course, they're the other way around. So we can live in a world where people hoard, and worship quantity. And they have no idea what quality is. You have people who may not have much quantity, but their quality, what they have, is worth more than all the quantity someone else has. So in a way, the word number has paradoxical element to it. On one hand, it seems to have a lot of value when you have a lot of something, but what does the word a lot mean? Does it mean a lot of quantity, or does it mean a lot of quality? I'm not going to go into all the details that he discusses, but he talks about a basic question in Judaism, which is counting people. Is this a positive thing or a negative thing? Sometimes we find it's not considered positive to count people. It's considered actually an ayin hara, like an evil eye type of thing. You don't count people. On the other hand, we find in the Bible, all kinds of counts, census. When they leave Egypt, they're counted. Before they went into Egypt, they're counted 70 souls. Then all the numbers are 600,000, etc., etc. And he cites from the Shalah that's saying it depends how you count. If counting is focusing on the sheer volume, then it's a negative thing. If counting is focusing on quality, on trying to appreciate the quality of something, then it's a positive. And there's actually 2 different ways of counting. One is divisive. By saying counting, you say you and me, so there's 2, it means we're separate from each other. Or you can count and say how many parts in this unity, how much harmony within diversity. So you see, diversity can lead to divisiveness, diversity can lead to harmony. So the number in Sphira is really focusing on the structure of existence is exactly the way God wanted it to be, that this world should be a structured universe. Not to eliminate or annihilate the structure. That you and I are not the same. We have different way of thinking. We have different faces. We have different personalities. We have different missions in this world. But there's a risk involved as soon as you create a world of diversity, that everyone has their own self interest agenda. So we can end up just being maybe collaborating, but really being separate and divisive and warlike at times, which is really the story of life. where people's in their own interest step on or hurt others because that's what they stand to gain, and they're not interested in another person's welfare. So the word number, therefore, on one hand defines the structure of existence, on the other hand challenges us to challenge our numbers, so to speak, the raw numbers that divide us, to try to appreciate the quality. So your body is full of multitude. We have 75 trillion cells, but you don't see yourself made up of 75 trillion parts. You see yourself as one individual, hopefully, sometimes two personalities, but or more. One individual that's made up of pieces. So you see your pieces like a piece of art. When you look at a beautiful piece of art, or you look at a sunset, or you hear music, it may be made up of it's definitely made up of many components, but you're hearing one beautiful song. You're seeing one piece of art. Then later you can break it down and say, this piece of art is made up of these different hues and colors and shapes and images and scenes and so on. So that concept of number, therefore, to bring it down more, let's put it in more psychological terms, is we look at each other, each of us sitting in our own chair. Do you see someone that's your competition? Do you see someone that's taking away is challenging your turf? Is taking away resources that which leads to, of course, jealousy and the divisiveness of the distinction between us? Or do you see another person as another musical note and you're one musical note in that same composition? We live in a very insecure world, where people feel constantly that someone's taking something away, and therefore we fight for our rights. We fight for our turf, for our piece of it. And that, of course, leads to all other stuff. Now, of course, we never blame ourselves, we blame everyone else. If they weren't fighting me, I wouldn't fight them, type of thing. If they weren't trying to take anything away, I wouldn't be so defensive or so possessive or so, whatever the word for it is, controlling. So right there you have the word number, really those two options. We'll come back to this. Then comes the second interpretation, which is the sphere from the word tell a story. Interesting. So you could have sheer raw numbers that focus on the raw quantity of something, and then that same word could also tell you a story, tell you an inner story, an inside story. And so that's like a deeper and more subtle and more refined interpretation of the word sphere, where the sphere is not just an instrument that's creating distinctions, which is the focus on a number, but now it's an instrument that's telling a story. And when you tell a story, obviously you're dealing more with the soul of something than just its body. So if someone were to say, okay, you look at the thing very superficially, you'll say it's made up of 25 components. Or, as I said before, a family of 10, or a family of 5, a family of 3, or any other type of thing that you broke down into details. But then when someone starts telling you the story of these details, you realize that in each one of these individuals, let's say a family, there's a whole story behind them. You start hearing people's life stories, for example, they stop becoming just another number and a statistic. They become a valuable entity. You realize, so this person has a whole story. They have parents, and their parents had parents, and they went through on a journey. Everybody's got their ups and downs. Somewhere along our journey or our parents' journey, there were some miracles. Why was I saved, or why was I able to make it through? Everybody's got their life story, their trajectory, so to speak. When you hear someone's story, you have a whole different approach to a person than when you just see them as another body, another body in a stadium. Because you begin to become personal. So the spheres have a second element, besides being instruments that create distinction and distinct numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're also storytellers. They tell a story. Every individual has a story. And then there's finally the third interpretation, which is that sphere comes from the word illuminating. It illuminates. What does illuminate means? That not only you're hearing a story, because the story can also conceal a lot. Your story tells you that there's more going on behind the scenes, but illuminating is actually giving you an illumination, an insight into someone's life. So sometimes you hear a story, especially from someone who's a sage or someone who's an older person. You hear their story, like from a grandfather or a grandmother. You hear the story of their lives when they lived wherever they were, wherever they came from, especially from another world, from a different, from the shtetl or from another part of the planet. So you start realizing after a while, not only do you realize they have a beautiful story to tell, which is already more than number and just statistics, but you also realize, hey, like my grandmother were once like me. They were once a little child with dreams and ideas and all kinds of things, and it illuminates about and tells you the personality of a person. So basically what we have here is one word sphere, which really reflects essentially 3 steps of every journey. Every journey in relationships, how we get to know each other. You meet someone for the first time, they're a statistic. Right? What do you mean a statistic? They're a person that probably you could tell by body language, they're a certain height. So let's speak from, basically, everybody's got their proportions, And that's, of course, extremely external and superficial, but that's what you see first. And then there's their statistic in the sense that they have a name, they have a serial number, you know what I'm saying? They have a business card, what they do. These are very distinct properties that tell you really nothing about a person. So when you ask someone, who are you? And they give you their business card, they're giving you their number, they're not giving you their story. They give you their business card, that's what you do, that's not who you are. And usually what you do is not even reflective of who you are. Many people are doing things that are not at all what they want to do. Not at all reflecting or mirroring their real aspirations. They're doing it because they need a job, or they need it out of necessity. So essentially the world of numbers and statistics is, you can call it the world of survival, which is sadly the place that most of us occupy most of the time. So basically we're living in a world of numbers. So I say numbers, I don't just mean in the literal sense, as I said, numbers in a world of size, in a world where size matters, if you want to put it humorously. A world where that's defined by parameters, that's defined by structures, and so on. But it's not an airtight reality, meaning it's not stuck, because that sphere, those spheres, and let me use an analogy, it may be a little helpful. Think of a grand cosmic artist creating the single most beautiful piece of art ever created. A massive piece of art. Today it's actually made up of 7 billion individuals and billions and trillions more of minerals and vegetables and animals. It's the universe which we live in. It's a piece of art. Now this piece of art is created by an artist with a lot behind the scenes. But what we see is only the surface level. Or what we see at the moment. We look out the street, you see the sky, you see this. You're told that there's all kinds of things going on. But what we see is really purely the sheer measurements, the sheer parameters. We have heavens, we have earth, we've measured it, we've traveled. We live in a world that is defined by time and space. But this time and space is a beautiful piece of art created by, as I said, this cosmic artist. You can look at it purely on a surface level, live on the survival level. That means you're just living your piece out in this piece of art, not even realizing that it's art, not even realizing that there's a deeper story going on, and definitely not realizing the illumination of it all. That's where most of us function, on the top of the head of a needle, on the tip of the iceberg, where we try to function to survive, make ends meet, and so on. But there's much more going on. It is a piece of art. And if you begin to dig a bit into your own life, into other people's lives, a story begins to emerge. What is the story? The story of what the artist wanted with this piece of art. Why did he put it here in the first place? So when you're distracted, or you're busy with your own survival, obviously you're only going to focus on what I need right now. I'm hungry, I need to eat. I'm tired, I need to sleep. I need love, I need to find somebody. I need this, I need that. We have all kinds of needs. You're definitely not focusing on the art and the story of your life and the story of other people's lives. But that same sphere that the artist used to actually paint every detail, like a paintbrush. The sphere is a paintbrush. To use the paint, that paintbrush also has another name. It's called a storyteller. So the same paintbrush also tells a story if you allow it to. And if you allow it to, it means that when you meet somebody or you're in a given situation, you're not just looking at how I can manage or how I can survive. You look for what we'll call the choreography of the experience. Two people meet. Why are we meeting? Most of us initially think, well, let's see what I can get from you. If it's a business meeting, if it's something else, we all have. If we're a little more sensitive, we think, well, one second, what's the divine providence, the hashgacha, that led us together? There's some story here that it uncovers. And then when you think that way, you may make a new friend, and you realize that there's a deeper story, and the story begins to unfold. And any of you that have long friends for a long time know that the story of your life with that friend goes back and has so many layers to it. It's far richer than anyone that looks at it from the outside will ever see. It's a piece of art with all its ups and downs. Now, I hope we're all blessed to have such friends. But you have the same piece of, the same characters. One is just surviving, just the external, the number, and the other has a whole story behind it. Imagine everyone you've ever met in life you have a story with. That would be a pretty rich life. Many of us will say, I just have too many friends as it is. Leave me alone. What does that mean? It means that you're too busy with survival. That means you have no room for any type of something more depth. Is that what you're saying? I'll let you answer those questions yourself. And then there's the third step. The third step is not only does this paintbrush paint a picture, which we call pure functioning and survival, biological life, but it also tells a story, but it also has another thing. It illuminates. It actually can reveal dimensions within you and within the other person and within every interaction of higher dimensions of awareness, higher dimensions of experience. The tragedy is that when we get stuck in the number level, which means on the quantity, on the surface level, it's very hard to get out of that. But the good news is that existence... Oh boy, do we have another one? But this may go for a while. Is it going? Okay. The good news is that it's not we're not trapped. We're trapped by our own perception. We're trapped by our own limitations in thinking that there's no hope. So let's take real scenarios. I'll take a case study that happens very often. I hear it. People tell me, unfortunately, more often than we'd like, where two friends get into a battle, something happens. After years of loyalty and friendship, one of them decides or one of them feels that the other person betrayed him or her. And of course it can be quite unnerving and quite disturbing, especially if it's a long-term relationship. And of course people have talked to me about these type of things. The first thing, of course, you want to explore is it really irreversible? And sadly, in most cases it's not irreversible, but the person thinks it is. Obviously, there's always possibility someone really does something, a mistake, or some type of real, causes some real destruction. But it's not as common as you may think. Because if a relationship lasted and endured all the ups and downs through a long period of time, then usually it means that there's some connection there. And if it was one thing that can come and just destroy that whole connection, then one has to wonder what kind of connection was there in the first place. But of course, this is case by case, and I'm not going to suggest that every scenario is reversible. But I have rarely found one that's really truly not. It comes down to our attitudes, because some people just can't forgive. That doesn't mean it's not reversible. It means you may be locked and trapped. That doesn't mean the situation objectively is. But how do you tell that to someone? Want to stop here? Just a quick battery change. So it's hard for me to go through every case possible study, but I want to just talk about this for a moment. Let's step away from this. I'll get back to the friend thing. Let's say in your own life, things are going pretty well, and then, God forbid, something happens, challenges you. You're fired from your job. A relationship falls apart. I'm not getting out who to blame, but that's now what's happened to your life, and you can't do anything about it. Let's take that type of scenario. So you have really three options. Either you go into complete denial and just make believe nothing happened, and even though it's painful and so on, just play aloof, one way. Number two is you get devastated and you can't move from there, you get paralyzed. And number three, which is what I'm going to suggest, is what's called the choreography. Obviously, if you can prevent the situation and you have something you can do about it, by all means. But after the fact, you lose a family member, a death you could do nothing about. Talk about a scenario that's really not dependent on anybody. God did it. Or whatever. We don't know the mysteries of why it happened. So how do you deal with it? If you understand that your life is a story, not just based on pure survival and my comfort zone, you look at it completely differently than if you just look at it as my comforts. If you're living on the number level, so to speak, then everything is a statistic. Now, this is taken away from me. I feel like I'm less. But everything has a deeper story. Everything has a bigger picture. And a bigger picture means there's a deeper choreography. It means it needs more humility. And if you go even further, it could actually illuminate new things in your life that you would never have imagined. So life circumstances that we face, whether it's the difficult things in life I mentioned before, or it's just the finite reality of our existence, is far more than meets the eye. As much, it's not, what you see is not what you get. That is what the essential Judaism and Torah teaches us. In Kabbalistic terminology, it means that the instruments that put existence into place are instruments that also have within them deeper dimensions that can reveal things in our lives that we never would have imagined. So it's not an airtight reality. It's not just an artist painted our lives and goodbye, Charlie, and that's it. You're a predestined, defined, limited life. But within those instruments are, as I said, the stepping stones and the building blocks that we can dig deeper and find deeper type of experiences in our lives. Just think of it on a very basic level. Your mind, no matter how good it is your conscious mind has its capacities. Sometimes when something doesn't work the way you want, or you're challenged, you dig deeper, and you suddenly realize that you have more more creativity than you think you did. Creativity is always going to be an outgrowth of some type of challenge. The greatest creativity comes when someone challenges you. When you're just riding and treading water, or an automatic pilot, your best ideas will not emerge from you. It's like what the Talmud says, an olive doesn't produce oil until you press it. That's what it says. This is becoming Rosh Chodesh Kislev. This is the month of olives, the month of Hanukkah, oil. So it's an analogy for life. It's an analogy for life. Your inner story is usually not revealed unless there's a challenge. The more challenge, the more your inside story emerges. What you're capable of. You know what you're capable of. Now this doesn't mean we invite challenges and we invite pressure and exertion, but without it, you will not be shaped into who you really are. You know, what do we call diamonds? Diamonds, what we call, are a result of very serious pressure, and that we call a diamond. Or what do you say about a tea bag? You don't know how strong it is until you put it in hot water. The same thing is in human beings. If you want to know the deeper story of somebody, challenge them. And hopefully challenges don't always have to be negative, they can be positive. Let's talk intellectual challenge. You know, especially if you're a smart person and you always get away doing being smarter than everyone around you. Meet somebody that meet your match and let them challenge you. Or meet someone that has a different type of strength that you don't have, and you'll see, it'll force you. First you'll be uncomfortable. You say, you don't like to be challenged, you have it all figured out. But if you're a really honest person, you realize this is an opportunity for you to become a stronger person. If you're a writer, I speak as a writer, writing is all about being challenged. You write, and then someone challenges it. Or you challenge yourself. You look at it and you don't like what you see. Because in writing, there's a reality check. Others can read it. You know, when you're not writing, you're not communicating. So nobody can challenge you because it's all in your thoughts. Which maybe is one of the fears why we don't like to speak or write, because that way somebody can contradict what we're saying. And we don't want to be wrong. It's like anything. The risk of getting a no. But on the other hand, as the Talmud says, that my teachers taught me much, my colleagues taught me more, and my students, metalmidei, yeshem mekulam, and I learned most from my students. How could a teacher say that? The students are clearly inferior to the teacher in the knowledge. The colleagues are more closer to him, and his teachers are greater than him. So where would he learn most? From his teachers. No, it's because your students, for two reasons. First of all, the fact that you have to express the idea to a level that's beyond yourself, so you need to dig deeper to explain it to someone that doesn't get it initially. And number two, the questions that students ask will be questions, sometimes beginner's questions, but they force you to really challenge your premises. You know, what you think are your assumptions are also clear, and suddenly a child says to you, 1 second, it forces you to sometimes dig a lot deeper to figure out whether your assumptions are correct. And you'll see, those that have a clarity, an idea, will be the ones that can explain it to far, far more beginners than a person who's not so clear about the idea. Those that have difficulty explaining to a beginner usually is a sign that they don't have it that clear. It's like they say short is long. If you can't say it in 2 minutes, you probably haven't really thought it through. Now that doesn't mean that everyone speaks in 2 minutes has it thought through either. Let's just make that clear. It just means that the person who really has it figured out can't sum it up. And I know this for myself, that sometimes you can't. You think it's so complex. Yes, it could be complex, but nevertheless, summary is a sign that a person really has it clear. They can say it in succinct terms, the elevator pitch, as they say. So bottom line is that in the story of our lives, we start off with things that are very simple, and we look at things in a very number-like way, raw numbers. We travel and understand there's a deeper story. And then we travel and realize there's an illuminating dimension. That's the meaning of the spheres. So everything in life has these three dimensions. And if you're able to apply it to your own life by looking at interactions we have, even difficult ones. And let me go back now to that friend that a person, let's say, after many years, there's been some betrayal. Something has broken the friendship. And again, I'm not talking about each individual case. I'm talking more in general terms. In general terms, it's a challenge when someone you've known for so many years and gone through so much with, suddenly something happens. The challenge is what will happen now. Sometimes the easiest approach is just to cut off because it's uncomfortable or because it just seems that you've been hurt too much. But there are times that maybe you should explore it. Maybe not with that person. Maybe with an objective person. Someone that, so you won't necessarily make the other person think that you really, maybe it's you, when they really did something wrong. What are you actually doing? What you're doing is not allowing yourself to get caught in pride and get caught in the numbers, in the blame game, so to speak, in pointing fingers, in the world of numbers that I described earlier, in the world of separation. Because in the big picture, there's always more going on than meets the eye. So two people can have been friends for 30 years and suddenly decide no more. I remember once going to a birthday party of someone, 70th birthday party. And on my way going in, there was a man that was outside who I knew, and I knew both of them. And he said to me, I haven't spoken to this man, my friend, for 10 years. And we had a falling out. But I thought, he's 70 years old, I'm 72 years old, we're not going to live forever. And I decided I'm just going to swallow it and I'm coming to the party. And I looked at him with admiration. Nothing happened. He didn't make up with the guy. He just realized there's bigger things going on in life. He realized we have our disagreements, but the connections we had over so many years was more powerful. And I don't even know if they made up per se. He may not have addressed it. But he was not going to allow himself to just completely destroy a relationship. The reason it's so easy for us to do that really comes down to our own myopic vision, to be very honest. Again, I'm not talking about situations that warrant it. But remember, you are not in the position usually to say that it warrants it because you're subjective. Let someone who's objective look at it and say, yeah, I agree that this really deserves you never speak to that person the rest of your life. See if you're ready to courageously present that to someone if you're in that situation or you know someone in that situation. Here I'm sure nobody has this issue here in this room. But we all have our moments and times. So this is an example of sometimes doing something which will absolutely get you out of a miserable place to a better place. Because you may not forgive, you may feel very right that you're right, but that you may still live with a miserable situation though you didn't forgive that person because you have your own limitations and problems. What this spherist so-called methodology teaches us is that every situation has opportunities. And even if you don't completely resolve it, the fact that you've challenged yourself will teach you new things about yourself and teach you new things about the other person and so on. So whatever situation a person is in, they have absolutely the possibility and the opportunity to go from one place to the next. Because the way God created existence, He created it in a fluid way. Nothing is etched in stone. There's no such thing. As I said, it's art. But it's more than just art. Art is inanimate. This is mobile art, if I could put it that way, in the age of mobility. This is art in motion. So meaning that life is dynamic, and just like every day we breathe many times, and we're constantly going through renewal, the same is with the larger story of the universe. There's a story that's unfolding. And we're all parts of that story. And either you become a static element and basically freeze in your place and your part of the story gets frozen while the rest of the world continues on, or you free yourself through a little bittul, through a little humility and modesty, and allow yourself to be carried with the story that's unfolding. And then opens up the third dimension of illumination. That's how it is. So we are in a sense all locked, trapped olives, and with a little pressure you can release olive oil, and if you put a little more pressure and you light it, it becomes an illuminating flame. So there's an olive, there's the oil, that's the inside story, and then the oil can become fuel for Hanukkah candles. That's every situation in life has those three options. First, it begins as raw numbers, as a raw entity. Then with a little pressure you can discover something deeper. And then you can discover that deeper thing can actually shed light, can illuminate, can warm its environment. And the connection to the Pasha, and this Ve'ela told us, is like this. The story, even though Isaac and Ishmael were at war with each other, Ishmael was sent away by Abraham at the behest of Sarah. Even though Esau and Jacob are at war with each other from pregnancy, they're still brothers, and the Torah still talks about it as the context of a story. Ve'ela told us, these are the children. These children will be at war throughout their lives and throughout history, just as Ishmael and Isaac are at war. Yet they're all part of one story. So Ve'ela told us there's no such thing as a cutoff and say, oh, Ishmael's story ended, which is like somewhat, he's not Isaac, now let's talk about Isaac. No. They may have to live and do different parts of the world. They may not be able to get along, but they're still one family. So the truth is, the Torah is telling us, even the nations that are at war are part of one family. Each has their role to play. Now, hopefully we don't have to go through wars, and we don't have to go through battles, as fortunately news breaks out again from Middle East, because that requires the wisdom that we understand our individual roles. And each has its role. So Yishmael has its role of refining the world through the Yishmael's method. That then in turn leads to the children and offspring and fruit of Isaac. And that in turn leads to the children of Isaac, which are Esau and Jacob. And then that in turn will lead to the children of Jacob. And he will build his family. And we are here sitting here in their grandchildren. The story continued. Imagine if someone else lived in the moment of the Bible, they could have easily said, you know what? It's very uncomfortable and that's that. It's over when we die. No. But the wisdom of Jews was they always knew that the story will continue. And no matter how painful it may have been the stage that they had to go through, they knew one thing, we have to carry the baton to the next generation. That was the key. In every generation that was the case. That's why nothing could destroy them. Not the Holocaust, and not the pogroms, and not the Inquisition, and the Crusades, and not Egypt, and not the battles going on in Abraham's tent, and in Isaac's, and in Jacob's. Because there was a bigger picture, a bigger story. Look, a little later we're going to hear how Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers, almost killed. He too realizes there's a story. When they finally meet him, he doesn't say, how could you have done this to me? Because if he lived in the world of numbers, then there's revenge. You did this to me, tit for tat. What did he say? Don't feel sad. Because if we're not for me brought here, for you not sold me here, I would not have been able to save you and the world. Because it was his idea that saved the world from famine. So it was God that used you as an instrument. He understood the story, and he was able to forego his personal feelings. This doesn't mean we have to overlook everything that happens to us, but it means never ever create an airtight story that, my life is over with, or the script has been written, I'm damaged goods, or it's hopeless. That is ultimate arrogance, even though it sounds like self-deprecating, but it's really arrogance, because who are you to say the story is over? You're not the artist. You're not the artist. You didn't put it in place. You're not the choreographer. You're one piece of the puzzle. And if you live it through, and if you live your life according to and you live up to your calling, you'll be merit to be part of the bigger story. What right do you have to say the story stops with me, and it's frozen here? That's it. That's a very narrow perspective. I'm not saying this to be critical. I understand when some people, and all of us, get into situations where we're very pressured and we're very emotional and we're overwhelmed. But sometimes you have to say to yourself in stronger moments that when I get into a place like that, don't let me be self-destructive. So it's really something we should say to ourselves and realize there's a bigger picture. And there's more than a bigger picture, there's an illuminating picture. And when you have that ability to step back, you have yourself a real life. A life that is far more expansive than you can ever imagine. And remember, think about it. You are a character, a divine character in a narrative that began a long time ago. You're chosen to be here. You're chosen to be here by a choreographer. However, there's one little caveat. It's not so little. In this case, when an author writes a book, so the characters do what the author wants. Here, the characters have a right to suddenly decide not to do what the author wants. That's what God did. He took a risk. He's an author. He's an interactive author. His characters can choose to follow the script or not follow the script, or create their own script, or just stop the script right there. So think about this. It's a powerful lesson, a powerful message, how the Torah looks at life, it looks at history, it looks at the generations. Now usually I take this class a little longer, but tonight I have to, as I said, short is long. Even though, relatively speaking, the class is over an hour already, but compared to the marathons of an hour and a half or 2 hours, or as Velva likes to remind me, 3 hours, 4 hours, right? We've done that too? Because I have another speaking engagement I have to go to. But I hope what I've said does capture the message. And to sum it up, your life is a sacred story. Don't mess it up. Or like they say, you were born an original, don't become a copy. And your character is needed the way you are, with all your mishigas and quirks and stuff. It's needed. But the main thing is you got to forge ahead. You cannot stop and say, that's it. I'm not playing the game or something. You have to figure it out. And you use others, use friends. Remember, your character you are on the page, there are other characters on that page. You know who they are, the people you meet. The people sitting in this room, the people that we interact with. So I feel honored to be part of your narrative, and I hope you feel honored to me being part of your narrative. And if we could all join and understand how each of us gives and contributes, and as well makes things a little exciting and dramatic from time to time, Philip, you make sure to keep us on our toes, then the story becomes also an exciting one, and unfolds in the way it should unfold. So everyone should have a very blessed week. I want to again dedicate the Mazel Tov to Jeff and to Rachel, and also in Refuah Shlema for Nochem Chaim ben Sarah Golda, Refuah Shlema. And everyone who needs blessings, whether it's in shidduchim, marriage, or finding the soulmates. I should also say, Lili Nishmas. Right, Avram Ber ben Yosef Ephraim Alevi, the father of our dear friend Greg, passed away this past Shabbos, and may he, God console him. Hamokim Menachem Leschem B'Sech Shar L'Tzin Yerushalayim. And everyone else should have only good simchas and joy, and we will continue the class next week, the journey, and hopefully the characters will all participate, and Philip will continue his journey tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. Philip is right there in the back, cute guy, and everyone have a very pleasant evening, and you have a little extra time to what's the word I wanted to say, to absorb and process this information. Be well, everyone. Okay, thank you.